I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico in the early 40s, but my father lived in the deep south, and he had a drive-in restaurant in Montgomery, Alabama, and he had a stable of stock cars. So I was raised around race cars, and it didn't take long in the early 50s for me to develop an appreciation for hot rods. I was attracted to old 20s and 30s automobiles, and these, of course, made hot rods. And this was my first venture into maledom, into the rite of passage was my preoccupation with hot rods and motorcycles. And I have never been able to intellectually rise above that. My father, in 1954, when I was 12 years old, bought me a 34 Ford 5-window coupe. And I was obsessed with these early Fords, and I took this car out, and I got an axe, and I took the fenders off with an axe. And I took the hood off and every piece of accessory metal on this beautiful 34 Ford, and I had a hot rod. And I would drive it on the back roads of Alabama. Well, my parents got divorced, and I moved to Albuquerque, and I had to hunt out old car parts. So I started building a 27T Roadster with an Oldsmobile engine, much like the project that you've got here. I wasn't attracted to athletics. I just developed this, I got my maleness out of junkyards and wrecking yards and racetracks and whatnot like that, and drag racing. And when I was a kid, I would go downtown Montgomery or downtown Albuquerque, and then if you go to any big town in the 50s, on the outskirts of a big town is used car lots, and in the very back of used car lots is the junk cars, and that's where you found old V8 Fords from the early 30s. So that's what I would do on a Saturday. I'd go see a dime movie and get some popcorn and get a hamburger, and then go walk to the edge of town to find where the used car lots were and haunt the back lots of used car lots looking at early V8 Fords. And it got to be an obsession. And I joined a hot rod club in Albuquerque, the Rickshaws, and it just got to be too obsessional. And having a hot rod back in the 50s was one of your lowest phylums of society. You know, the police hated hot rods. Society wasn't big on it. It attracted a grease monkey element, and there wasn't an intelligentsia that would defend hot rodding. And so I got in in my later teens, I got in with a bad crowd and whatnot, and every cent I could beg, borrow, or steal went into old hot rod parts, you know. And so in my 20s, I had to rid myself of this thing, so I sold all my car parts and I moved to Los Angeles to go to art school. And I went through art school and taking fine arts. When I got out of art school, I had a few odd jobs and whatnot, but by divine providence, I landed this job as art director for Ed Big Daddy Roth, the car customizer. I'd met him earlier in 1960, and this was 1965 when I went to work for him. And I tried to rid myself of hot rod culture, but I found myself right in the core of it. And before long, I'm asking people about car parts. I'm saying, well, can you find me a 32 Roadster body? And I located a 32 Roadster body. The cycle started all over again. Now, if you compare that to today, the only people that can afford 32 Ford Roadsters are upper middle class to wealthy people, you know. A 32 Ford Roadster is a $100,000 car now, you know. So I guess it was probably divine providence that I fell in that rut that I'm stuck into today. When I was in diapers, my parents would sit me down on a big piece of butcher paper, and I would just start drawing, you know. I'd do an entire skeleton, a bone at a time, on a large piece of butcher paper, or I'd do involved landscapes as a kid, you know. And it was a compulsion that I could not get away from. It's fortunate that I had that, because I didn't do very well in high school. I was thrown out of a number of schools and had a lot of problems as a young man. And there's something I could fall back on, is the fact that I had an innate ability for draftsmanship, and I understood perspective, and I had a hunger for expressing myself graphically. Well, going through art school, I tried to present myself as a young intellectual. And in desperation, I got involved with Ed, and I realized I was right back where I started from, but it was on the highest level it could be, you know. And working for Ed Roth in the 1960s, was like a psychedelic think tank. My responsibility was as advertising, and I could come and go when I wanted, whatever I wanted to do. I could look any way I wanted, but I had deadlines to meet, and I had to do work, and that work had to be, as the term was, far out. See, it had to be flipped. And I could come and go. I had freedom, all the freedom I wanted, but the work better be on time, and it better be flipped out. See, so I met those qualifications, and unfortunately, I'm still in that vein today. As I said earlier, I was a consummate hot rodder and tried to shake that. When I started working for Ross, during the Vietnam War, you had a social change that happened. The Vietnam War stimulated an intellectuality in colleges, and hot rodding was outre, out. And it looked like to me, working at Ross, that maybe hot rodding wasn't going to be around very long. Maybe hot rodding was over. You know, intelligent, ambitious people don't build hot rods. You know, they don't piss their life away laying on their back in some grimy garage, putting in mufflers in an old 30s car. You know, that was a thing you don't do. And there wasn't a peer group to relate to that. And I thought, well, since I'm here and I'm with a bunch of grody hot rodders, now's a chance to pick up something I've always wanted, was a 32 Ford Roadster body. So I'd ask those guys there, I says, listen, I'm looking for a 32 Ford Roadster body. I don't want a coupe with the top cut off, and I don't want a cabriolet. I want a real open 32 Ford Roadster body. So one day this fellow Jake came and he says, get your checkbook. I found one in Seal Beach, $200. So we got a pickup truck and went out and got that Roadster body. It came with a frame, a pink slip, steering, radiator on the rear end. See? So immediately I transferred that piece of junk into, I took the title and had to put my name, even though it was just a Hulk that sit in the backyard. And so then, since I had the Roadster body, I started going to swap meets to pick up pieces. So I put the whole car together out of swap meet pieces. Now, unlike a lot of hot rodders, I had this emotional thing about the antiquity of the car. To me, to own the real car, it had a ghost, it had a karma. The damn thing was there, see? And nothing could be more romantic than a 32 Ford, because the 32 Ford was the first V8. The 32 Ford came out in the factory when they had those riots at the Ford factory. I mean, it was a very colorful car, and the car, when it came off the showroom floor, would fly. If you took a brand new 32 Ford, you took the fenders off of it, you had a missile, you had a torpedo, see? So I had my Roadster that I always wanted. The hell with the hot rod world, it's dying out. I'm going to just piece this thing together so when I get to be an old fart, I can put around this thing and relive my youth. Well, things turned completely around. It became an enormous fad. My 32 Ford Roadster in 10 or 20 years was, you know, like a $40,000 body. You know, and it's just ridiculous. It got where millionaires that used to be snobs that collected sports cars were buying up deuces, see? And this was, you know, this was turning the whole thing around. It was like, well, you know, I want to be a lowbrow person, you know, and to have this car, you know, it means I had to be a person of means. You know what I mean? There is a distinction between hot rods and street rods that has developed. Now, a hot rod is definitely got an ancestry of being a jalopy, see? Now, a street rod is almost a kit car built by almost always an older gentleman with money that's locked into a peer group that has to have certain modern modifications because his peer group declares it. And these guys, for some reason, tend to look down on the more rustic hot rods. Now, a hot rod is dangerous. It'll kill you. Hot rods were never well received. When I was young, girls hated them. They smelled, they stunk. The police stopped you. You were always broke down, and they were deadly dangerous. So you had elements of a hot rod that were very closely associated with the motorcycle culture, see? Now, you've got people today that are street rodders that are older gentlemen that want to take their wives out, and they want a perfect ride. You know, they want security, and they want the thing to be like a fenderless Corvette in reality, but a kit car. Well, a hot rod is not that. A hot rod is a a very fast, unstable antique automobile, and you have to respect it as that, you know. So men with money will spend hundreds of thousands, if not more, on fiberglass or metal exact replicas of cars, so they can be with their other buddy peer group, and you know, and relive an age that was never there. See, so there's not a right or wrong. Now, back in the 50s, when hot rodding started and car clubs started, you had an overabundance of people in car clubs that couldn't turn a wrench, that had dad's car. At the same time, you had authentic hot rod clubs that ran dragsters and ran cars on dirt tracks that were authentic people involved in it. So I would say that about 65% of the people that participate are light players. I wouldn't make derogatory remarks about them, but I would say they're sophomoric and light players in this thing. To me, it's a horrible compulsion like drugs. You know, you isolate me somewhere, you get me out in the field, and I'm looking for old car parts. You know, and it's not to show off to a peer group. It's a thing in me. See, so I don't really have a real peer group. You know, I don't have someone to show off my things to. I can show off to these guys, and these guys are way beyond me, because I do things to these guys that they think, well, that's kind of an old fart thing, you know. So these guys researched this thing out of old magazines and old photos. This car could be 1953. It's authentically studied. You know, they fought for these wheels and every little detail, and they fuss with each other. They form a peer pressure between each other, and they've all got to have those right old wheels. They've got to have those right gauges. Now, stuff like that to me was, I remember hot rodders, and hot rodders weren't the brightest people in the world, you know. And I would say 60 or 70% of the hot rods were put together out of junk. They weren't really fighting for real precise things. That came later when you tried to make an authentic hot rod. And there's a lot of these clubs, but I think the Choppers Club is the most fanatic for exact points on these things. In fact, the late Gray Baskerville said, these ain't hot rodders, these are restorers. Since before the Second World War, the authorities were always on hot rodders. California, they made all these laws to get hot rods off the street. Anything you could define to make a hot rod, they made a law against it, you know. You couldn't have flashy colors, they distracted people. You had to have fenders, you know. They went through a whole litany of these laws. It was the definitions of hot rod to get them off the street, because young people were getting killed in them. But there was a youth resistance to this. And that resistance took its form, and when no one was looking, you'd lit those goddamn tires up, you know. You pull up to a street light, you pull up to a red light, you look around, you look in your peripheral vision, there's nothing black and white, you lit those tires up. And I did it, and everyone else did it, you know. And it was a revolution. Now, you know, in the 50s and 60s, when the police pulled you over, they would go from one end of that car to the other. They would just rain hell on you. Now the hot rodders are far older than the police. The police are young. They don't have a real grasp on what hot rods are, but they do notice this car is like handmade. If any car in the world would have brakes, this thing would have them, you know. This thing is like a Swiss watch. This thing is certainly going to be safe. So you had a complete flip-flop in values and how the authorities look at these things. I did this about 6 months ago. No, I did this about 2 years ago. I lit the tires up off the street off Sunset. I come out of a parking place, and I lit the rear end up to pull the rear end out, and I straightened it up, and I lit those tires up, and I went about 40 feet, and there was 2 motorcycle cops standing there pulling me over. They could have given me a ticket, but they did something better. They said, ain't you a little old for this? And that did it. That was 5 tickets for me. And since then, I always think when I let that clutch out, are you going to be an ass here and, you know, in front of a bunch of people? When the Model Ts started selling around the period of the First World War, they started making a tremendous amount of speed equipment for Model Ts. So you could make a hot rod out of Model Ts. And when the Model A's come out, they started making overhead valve conversion kits for Model A's and putting those engines in dirt track race cars. Well, when the V8 come out, people were skeptical of it, but it proved itself, and you could take the fenders off and really make a hot rod real quick out of an early V8. 3 things happened to make Southern California the hot rod hub. Number one, the Depression took about 2 or 3 years to get here, so they sold an awful lot of early V8 Fords out here before the Depression hit hard. Number two, because of the weather, they sold an awful lot if not the majority, of open cars like roadsters and Phaetons. And number 3, we were gifted by not only good weather, but we had the lakes out here, see. Now, Southern California has a history of dirt track racing that's rivals, if not better, than the East Coast. So you had a lot of automotive race car equipment out here in the 20s and 30s, had Legion Ascot and whatnot. So in the early 30s, late 20s and early 30s, they started running at the dry lakes. This was like brand new Model A's and V8s right off the showroom floor. So you had that established from the get-go, when those cars were brand new. When they started making the first hot rod movies in the 40s, you had a California background, see. The first car magazines come out. When I was a kid, my Bible was at the newsstand. It was Hot Rod magazine, you know. I went and got that hot rod, and I saw those palm trees in the background. I knew there was a hot rod heaven, see. So besides being an artist, I was attracted to this. There's a hot rod world out here. And now it's a faint ghost of itself, you know, a faint shadow of what it was. You know, but in the 50s, there was some wild. In the 50s, you couldn't go 3 or 4 blocks without seeing an open-wheeled automobile or some kind of cheesy custom. Everywhere. You know, it was a thing that was omnipresent. You know, it was ubiquitous to see some kind of modified car out here. This was a very small painting I did in 1976. It's called Hot Rod Race. Now, when this was painted in 1976, it was kind of looked down on to paint hot rods looking muddy and miscolored wheels and cracked windshields and bad license plate mounts and having the friction tape hanging off the wiring to the headlight. But this was situations that I'd encountered as a young hot rodder. Now, this is melodramatic, granted, but I think it gives you a good Buffalo Bill explanation of an illegal hot rod race with the police chasing some cars that have been involved in illegal activities, and an accident ensues in getting away from the police. Now, I've got over here a 34 Ford Phaeton, which is one of the rarest and most desirable open cars, that is apparently at this period of time just a cheesy car with the original black paint turned purple on it that had the fenders rudely torn off and headlight mounts welded on. And it's speeding away in the foreground, and the cars in the background that are still being chased by the police. And the police look like they're in like about a 53 Chevy four-door sedan. These cars over here to the right look like they're in a little bit better quality of craftsmanship. The 40 Ford is flipped, and when it's flipped, the wheels have snapped against the spindles have snapped all the way to the left, and they snap so hard that they not only threw the hubcap off, but they popped the beauty ring off. Now, the early flame painting had a very wild psychopathic look to it because they actually tried to paint their interpretations of fire. Today, people don't try to paint fire. People try to paint flames that other people had painted flames, that they saw other people painted flames. So flame painting has actually evolved into crab claws. See, and the essence of the thing being something on fire has been kind of set to the side. Now, we've got an innocent bystander in a 52 Ford that's got involved in this thing. So this gives you a sense that this is illegal racing on the Southern California Desert Highway, see. So my artistic commentary on this is it's a pretty good rendering of the cars. The sky's a little melodramatic, but I wanted that drama. The amount of grill show bars, all the technical stuff's pretty good on this thing. Okay, the next painting here, I did this as a center spread for Hot Rod magazine in the early 70s. This was a tribute to body shop craftsmanship, to customizers, and the name of this painting is A Salute to Those Craftsmen Who Were a Devil with a Hammer and Hell with a Torch. And the central figures I have here is George Barris is the king of the customizers, then Ed Big Daddy Roth, the maestro, because Ed was the more artistic, the more bohemian. Ed had always saw himself as a bohemian type of automobile builder. Now, starting up in the far corner, we see a red devil, and he's putting on body lead. But back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, they would repair dents with body lead and not body putty. And they would actually melt lead on to fill rough spots. So all the vignettes are framed in idealistic framework of lead, and there's lead paddles and whatnot. Now in this vignette, cartouche up here to the left, we have a guy doing probably one of the most difficult tasks in altering a car body, and that's sectioning it. And that means the entire body is sliced horizontally right through the entire car, and a couple of inches taken out and grafted back together. So that was really a supreme task. Now down here in this left-hand corner, we have a picture of an early custom car from the late 30s and early 40s, a car built by a fellow named Harry Westergaard. He was one of the pioneer custom car builders. George Barris and his brother Sam worked for Harry Westergaard, and Harry Westergaard died early on and was long forgot about, but it just in the last couple of decades his legend has been revitalized, and I kind of did him honor here showing one of those really beautiful Westergaard customs. Now over here, up in the right-hand corner, we've got a car show in the late 50s, early 60s, when car shows become Baroque ridiculousness and just rococo to the general public. We've got a 55 Chevy here that's got doors that open up like a Mercedes, and then the other half of the door drops down. And this 55 Chevy is just done ridiculously, a car that's so impractical that you couldn't drive, and it's presented with all these winning trophies, and it's circled in angel hair from Christmas trees to just overdo the whole thing. And I've given it a ridiculous name of Sonny LaRocque's Fabulous The Pearls of Shangri-La 5.5, which was kind of the mood these custom cars had in the 50s and 60s. Down here in this bottom vignette, the large area here, I've told a little cartoon story here of a gentleman that's gone to high school parking lot, and a milk truck has backed into his 50 Mercury. And this 50 Mercury is obviously worked out and done to the nth degree, and this clumsy milkman has just backed into it like it was a used car or something. So this guy's girlfriend is restraining him from going over and physically assaulting the milkman. So this kind of appreciation of early vehicles in Hot Rod magazine in the early 70s was like the very beginning of retro car appreciation. I mean, hot rodding had come to a point where it was starting to appreciate its earlier misgivings, its earlier foibles. Okay, this next picture is called Lead Sleds, 40 years of the nation's finest customs. And I've got in here probably the most prominent customs of the late 40s, 50s, and early 60s. So you get a real good cross-section of customizing craftsmanship. Now, there's something about custom cars I have to explain to you. A hot rod did not attract women. And people that got involved in hot rods, in many cases, enjoyed hot rods because they could forget women. They were a substitute for searching out women because women hated hot rods. But a custom car was exactly the other thing. It was the playboy's dream, and it attracted women. It was truly the vehicle of the lounge lizard. So you have to understand those two cultures were very, very different from each other, but they had overlapping characteristics because they both depended on modifications of early automobiles. This is taking a good cross-section of different custom car builders, and as the chips fall, as it may turn out, the vast majority of these are Barris-built customs. But nonetheless, here I've done a good tableau on Americana. This is a tribute to 55 to 57 Chevys. It's called the 3 Years of Automotive Infamy, Master of the 50s, 55 to 57 Chevys. Now, when I was a kid, when you said classic car, you were talking about Duesenbergs and Auburns and Grahams and things like that. Well, the word classic is just, it's lost its meaning. Now when you say classic car, you're talking about 55 Chevys or 54 Buicks or something like that. So that terminology's found a whole new meaning with a whole new generation of gentlemen. And this shows these mid-50 Chevys, which are the most precious and the most appreciated, I guess, of the cars of the 50s, all in some state of modification. The three cars coming at you is a 55, 57, 56 Chevy. They're all in drag character. The car down here is a 57 Chevy that has been mildly customized, which was just about the average fare for a young man in the late 50s and early 60s. I did this. The posters that you're looking at, the prints that you're looking at, were done for for car shows back east. So thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of these prints were sold in the 80s and 90s. And I find these in bathrooms, the tattoo parlors, and all over. And these things I am so proud to find these things tattooed on people and, you know, just... Okay, this particular print here is dealing strictly with 32 Fords. Every aspect I could find on 32 Fords. It says, the many faces of the 1932 Ford, the automobile that became a legend, Deuces Wild. And I've got up here all the different body styles that Ford made in 1932. I've got a central picture here of a backyard scene almost identical to what we have here in spirit. I mean, here we got funky people with dirty clothes on, working on something they could hurt themselves on. It was always a common sight to see people pulling engines with used children's swings, and they were always about ready to break. We've got a shade tree mechanic working underneath here. In the background, we've got some gentlemen that have chopped the top of a four-door sedan. Up here, we just got an old, used, worn-out roadster body. A nice American scene, a dog resting over here. We go up here, and here's where 32 Fords really excelled in the 40s and 50s, or on dirt tracks. There's where thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of 32 Fords met their glorious end from old dirt tracks. They were, their life was fast, hard, and glorious, and short. So that's where most of the wonderful 32 Fords ended up. On the dry lakes, here they are in one of their more classical forms, running into lakes at sunset. See? Okay, here is a 32 Ford running at Mines Field over here where LAX is when it's a brand new stock car in 1932 and 33. See? Okay, here is a 32 Ford when it violated the sanctity of the sports car world. See? And there's a lot of people who took a great deal of pride in being hot rodders and entering the sports car world because it upset a lot of people, these junky old Fords winning the trophies. The 32 Ford, of course, excelled on drag strips, and it was quite a front wheel raiser. Now here's the 32 Ford in the world I know probably the best is being stopped by the police. See? Now here's the 32 Ford in a little more elite area as a show car. See? That's when it's, it's when it's got a silver spoon in its mouth. Hot rods are kind of locked into a category of being that old passenger car body. Now, in the late 50s and early 60s, when Ed Roth came out, he was one of the first people to try to break that mold of being a prisoner of having to deal with old 20s and 30s bodies, and he went into an abstract form of cars. And of course, that today you can see in Boyd Coddington's cars and a number of people, Chip Foose and whatnot, that have taken cars into an abstraction. And I think these guys have done a wonderful job. But I get my jollies with these old hot rods, you know. I mean, I can see where these other guys are going, and I see the Plymouth Prowler and whatnot, you know, and I'm real appreciative of that. And I think hot rods in that modern form are really going to take off and they're going to advance. I think they're eventually going to overdo sports cars. Now, there was a term back in the 40s and 50s that used to be said that the hot rod is the true American sports car, say. And I think that is going to come to pass. I think that the modern sporty vehicle of the future will take on the stance and the look of the American hot rod.